Maggie had always been drawn to old things, antique stores, flea markets, anything with a sense of history. It was at one such flea market, tucked in the corner beneath dusty old paintings and tarnished silverware, that she found the mirror. It was small, framed in dark mahogany, with intricate carvings of vines and flowers creeping up the sides. Its glass was a little cloudy, but it had a certain charm that made Maggie feel like she was looking into a different time. She bought it for only a few dollars, a bargain she thought, and placed it on the wall of her apartment above the dresser. For days, it hung there, barely noticed as part of the clutter that filled her small, cozy space. But something about it started to nag at her. At night, when she passed the mirror, she could have sworn it reflected something different. Something. Sometimes it felt like the shadows in the glass didn't match the dim light of her room. Other times, the reflection seemed to linger longer than it should, even after she'd turned away. She bought it for only a few dollars, a bargain she thought, and placed it on the wall of her apartment above the dresser. For days, it hung there, barely noticed as part of the clutter that filled her small, cozy space. But something about it started to nag at her. At night, when she passed the mirror, she could have sworn it reflected something different. Something. Sometimes it felt like the shadows in the glass didn't match the dim light of her room. Other times, the reflection seemed to linger longer than it should, even after she'd turned away. The first incident occurred on a rainy evening. Maggie had been sorting through papers on her dresser when she heard a strange noise, a soft scraping sound like fingernails dragging across glass. She turned sharply, but there was nothing there. The room was still, except for the soft patter of rain against the window. The mirror seemed unchanged, but when Maggie looked closely, she could swear there was something new in the reflection. A faint figure, blurry and indistinct, hovered just behind her own reflection. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned, but again the room was empty. Maggie tried to shake it off. "It's just your imagination," she muttered under her breath. She didn't believe in ghosts or spirits. She was a practical woman. Still, something gnawed at her, like a chill creeping up her spine that she couldn't shake. The next few days, the feeling persisted. She started to feel. Whenever she passed by the mirror, she would glance into it, half expecting to see the shadow of someone standing behind her. At night, when she would drift off to sleep, the reflection seemed to shimmer as if it were alive, twisting and shifting ever so slightly in the dim light of the room. One night, unable to sleep, Maggie found herself standing in front of the mirror again, her tired eyes staring at her own reflection. She reached up to adjust a loose strand of hair, but something caught her attention. The reflection in the mirror was still, but the reflection of the room behind her wasn't. The dresser, the shelves, the lamp, they all looked slightly different, as if the room behind her were from a different time. The shadows were deeper. The walls seemed to warp as though the space itself was... Then she saw it. A figure, standing in the dark corner of the reflected room, barely visible, but unmistakable. It was the shape of a woman, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to be staring directly at her through the glass. Maggie froze, her breath catching in her throat. She knew the reflection wasn't. The woman wasn't there, not in the real room. She quickly spun around, expecting to find a shadow or a trick of the light, but the room was empty. It was just her, the rain tapping lightly against the window, and the mirror that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Her heart thudded against her chest, and she turned back to face the glass. The woman was still there, but now she was closer. Her features were clearer, pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, and thin, cracked lips that seemed to whisper something Maggie couldn't hear. Before she could move, the whisper grew louder, as if it were coming from the mirror itself. Maggie stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the rug. She turned away from the mirror, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone to call someone. Anyone. But when she glanced back, the woman's eyes had locked onto hers, filled with something predatory. The voice was clearer now. It was an agonized, pleading tone that carried the weight of years, of something trapped behind the glass. The woman's fingers twitched, as if scraping at the surface of the mirror, trying to push her way through. Maggie's instincts screamed at her to run, to leave the apartment, but something rooted her to the spot. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the reflection. She had to know. The voice, the woman, in the mirror, it was like an obsession she couldn't shake. "Who are you?" Maggie whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you want?" The woman's lips stretched into a thin, cracked smile, her mouth opening wide as if to speak, but all that came out was a horrible, hollow laugh. Then, with terrifying slowness, her form began to distort, the edges of her body becoming smeared, as if she were trying to break free of the glass. The voice hissed, no longer pleading, but accusing. The woman's fingers stretched out toward Maggie, pressing against the surface of the glass. Maggie could see her fingers begin to, as though they were actually toward her, the mirror no longer a barrier. She took a frantic step back, but the room around her began to bend and warp, the shadows twisting violently as if they were alive. The reflection in the glass was no longer a reflection of her apartment. It was something else, something wrong, a room that was dark, decaying, and twisted. The woman's hand through the glass. Maggie gasped and scrambled backward, but her feet caught on the rug, and she fell hard against the floor. Her breath caught in her throat as the woman's hand, now halfway through the mirror, reached for her. The fingers, long and pale, brushed against her arm, icy cold, and in the mirror laughed again. The reflection of the woman in the mirror grinned as her body began to slip through, the glass rippling like water. Maggie screamed, but it was too late. The woman's icy hand closed around her wrist, and with a sickening tug, Maggie felt herself being into the mirror. The next morning, the apartment was eerily quiet. Maggie's phone lay on the floor near the dresser, the screen cracked, a single message still visible on it, and in the mirror, now hanging empty on the wall, no reflection of the room, no reflection of anyone at all, just a dark, empty void.